Liliya Vladimirovna Borey. Absolute Truth of the Flower of Life. Comments. Introduction to my system of things. Hello forever and ever, my dear and respected reader. A huge heartfelt thank you for devoting your precious time to communicating with my thoughts. Today is day 64 on my calendar. The last one on this circle of my journey through the spaces of the I Ching matrix. The 64th space of this matrix is governed by the second law of the universe, the law of the physical system. Therefore, it will be logical before I begin the daily broadcast of my comments on the drawing of the matrix of 3719, petal forms of the flowers of life, to briefly introduce you to the system of my things. Today, by publishing the preface to my book, I, strictly speaking, already begin the broadcast of my comments on the book The Absolute Truth of the Flower of Life. And I very much ask you, my dear reader, to somehow make me understand how clearly and understandably I express my thoughts. I will be infinitely glad and grateful, and it will be very interesting for me to get acquainted with all your points of view on the issue covered in this book. We all need this, as forms of consciousness, in order to learn how to interact as conflict-free as possible in the process of providing our minds with excellent quality life. Preface. If you have opened this edition of my book, The Absolute Truth of the Flower of Life, then you are interested in my comments on its pictures. And I would like to begin these comments with an explanation of the choice of the title of this book. More precisely, I would like to talk to you about the concept of the absolute truth. When I discovered Srimad Bhagavatam, this phrase, absolute truth, simply froze my consciousness. I categorically disagreed with attaching this concept to any personality, even if it is the most ancient and the most beautiful. Therefore, when the image of the universe in the system of 37 forms of the flower of life, consisting of 19 absolutely identical circles, arose before me, and this image was connected with the 7-part image of the universe described in Urantia, I thought, here it is, the truth. Because, according to the definition known to me, truth is the balance of all truths participating in the body or matter under consideration. And for me this balance has received a clear and precise image. But a flower, no matter how ideal its form, cannot be not only absolute, but also simple truth. Because it has boundaries. Just as no personality can be truth. Because every personality, as a form, must have boundaries. And every form is therefore called a form, because its image has clear, unambiguously recognizable boundaries. Every image of every form is limited by definition. That is precisely why no matrix can be called truth either. Because it, with all its all-encompassing fullness, also has boundaries. But then what truth does the author of Srimad Bhagavatam actually speak so diligently about? And he could only speak about the process of drawing intersections of absolutely identical circles of different points of view on the space around us. And they must be drawn so that the center of each circle is on the border of the previous one. And the line of the circle being drawn at the current moment must necessarily and unambiguously pass through the center of the one already drawn. It is precisely and only such drawing that creates the ocean of lotus feet described by the author of the Srimad Bhagavatam. From the lines of the roots of movement of these lotus feet, any image and any meaning can be derived. And it is precisely this infinity of possibilities that is the truth. Is a balance of all truths participating in the body or matter under consideration. This book is the result of my experiences from reading the Srimad Bhagavatam. And I think that I am not the only one who had my brains burned out and my soul turned inside out by the sage Vyasadeva. But when, after 38 weeks and 5 days, I finally reached the end of this text, my exhalation was like this. Today I finished reading the Srimad Bhagavatam and published its last chapter in the Contactee community of the same names, //vviv.com/club. Thank God. Today I have answers to all my questions. Today I formulate the meaning of this book within the framework of the proverb, A person learns to speak in order to learn to be silent. A person learns to walk in order to learn to sit. One becomes material in order to become transcendental. Quote from Srimad Bhagavatam. Book 1, Chapter 1, Text 1. O my Lord Sri Krishna, Son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I meditate upon Lord Sri Krishna because he is the absolute truth and the original cause of all causes for the creation, maintenance and destruction of the manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly aware of all manifestations, and he is independent because there is no cause other than him. It was he who first instilled the Vedic knowledge into the heart of Brahmaji, the first living entity. Even great sages and demigods are bewildered by him, just as a man is bewildered by the delusive appearance of water and fire or land and water. It is only because of him that the material universes, temporarily manifested by the interaction of the three modes of nature, appear real, although in fact they are unreal. Therefore, I meditate on him, Lord Sri Krishna, eternally residing in the transcendental abode, which is always free from the illusory images of the material world. I meditate on him, for he is the absolute truth. Well, the guy really burned through. The absolute truth, misleading. The absolute truth does not need to be burned through with texts, clearly constructed as formulations of neurolinguistic programming. Just as you cannot mercilessly hypnotize the heart into loving you simply because you want to establish your authority in it. At some point, this heart will understand that joy appears in the heart not from words about someone's authority, but from the ease of communication with something simple and understandable. Joy does not need words. It needs the ease of communication with understandable meanings. And that is why in this book I suggest simply drawing absolutely identical circles of the flower of life and coloring them in 7 colors of the rainbow. And I suggest coloring the outer edges of its form of 19 circles in brown and pink, so as not to lose sight of this form. Because I suggest tying the entire drawing process to the 33 laws of the physical universe and 64 days of being in the spaces of the I Ching matrix. My goal is to show each artist a possible way of creating his own, free, self-sufficient and independent world. I want the drawing itself to lead each artist to the realization of the path of creating his own personality, similar to the personality of Krishna, who, directly and indirectly, is aware of all manifestations and is independent, for there is no other cause except him. The world in which we wake up every day is created every day by our consciousness. More precisely, our common consciousness creates the world around it with our points of view on it. We are all forms of common consciousness. And consciousness is an economic association, a unity of interested interactions of 3 minds, somatic, analytical and reactive. Everything that you and I see around us is created, preserved, destroyed and revived by these 3 minds. Including our hands. Because it is not the gods who burn the pots. We ourselves are simultaneously both carriers and forms of consciousness, and the embodiment of one of these 3 minds. And it will be easy for you to agree with this idea if you see that minds are skills and vital interests to be only oneself in spirit and in truth. The somatic mind creates information. And it can do nothing else, and does not want to. The analytical mind creates energy from the information at its disposal. And it can do nothing else, and does not want to. The reactive mind preserves the fruits of creativity of the somatic and analytical minds. And it can do nothing else, and does not want to. Each of us knows with our own skin the advantages and will of some of our own skills. All religious confessions and all political parties gather precisely on the basis of passion in the struggle for the victory of the authority of some specific skill in the universal consciousness. Actually, we can easily talk about this now only because the objective law of negation has finally worked. After all, for the previous 100 years we passionately experienced the idea of the hegemony of the proletariat. Now for 100 years we will chew over the idea of the unity and struggle of opposites. Well, if it must be so. Objectivity is interesting because it does not depend on the will of a single individual. The life of people, as forms of consciousness, which is the unity of minds, is limited in the time of presence precisely in the arena of confrontation of minds. Because consciousness, as an economic association of minds, ceases to exist as soon as the analytical mind leaves the game. But each mind can exist outside of time and space. The existence of minds begins immediately and only when they unite into consciousness. At the same time, being is not equal to life. The real life of minds is created only by a mature consciousness that has realized its own social significance, free and independent of minds. In order to create life, consciousness, consisting of minds, must become free and independent of them. Paradoxical. Remember the words, a genius is a friend of paradoxes. And if you already understand yourself a little, as one of the forms of consciousness, start looking in this direction. God help you. It's for the algorithm I offer here for coloring the circles of the flower of life in the process of going through the 64-day practice described here. It is completely tied to the Russian mnemonic proverb for remembering the order of colors in the rainbow. Every hunter wants to know where the pheasant sits. Because this proverb has a huge meaning for this practice. Firstly, this practice concerns absolutely every person looking for an answer to the question, who am I myself? Secondly, every person who is searching is, of course, a hunter. Because he wants to find what he really wants to have, what he really wants to own and what he really wants to use undividedly in his own life. Therefore, thirdly, he wants to know where the pheasant sits, the object of his desire, which is absolutely vital to him. In this book, I offer my own interpretation of the synthesis of 4 literary works. 1. Srimad Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva. 2. The Ancient Secret of the Flower of Life, by Dranvala Melchizedek. 3. The Chinese Classic Book of Changes I Ching, by Julian Konstantinovich Shutsky. 4. The Laws of the Physical Universe, taken from the film Crop Circles, Correct Decoding of Pictograms. 4, 609, published on YouTube by the channel Crop Circles, on 01/09/2015. We will agree to consider Yuri Ostakov, the speaker of this film, as the author of the idea. The 5th point of this list should be called the materials of the teaching of Roy Uruhu on human design. Because in these comments of mine I will constantly use them. The 6th item on this list will be Theodore Lau's book, Chinese Horoscope, translated from English by G. Okolelov. In these comments, both in the text and in the appendix, I quote from this book the hymns of the earthly branches. The 7th item on this list I will designate the book, Dianetics, by Ronald Lafayette Hubbard, the father of the Scientology Church. Because where there is talk about happiness, we must also remember the emotional tone scale that this man formulated. Each author from the sources named here is already a recognized authority. And I do not set myself the task of eclipsing their glory with my reflections on the thoughts they expressed. And I do not intend to create an authority for myself in the rays of their glory. I invite my reader to simply look at the drawing of the flower of life from another side. From my point of view, interesting and useful for his practical life. To begin with, so that you can create and save your own point of view on the title of this book, The Absolute Truth of the Flower of Life, I suggest simply viewing the entire array of pictures posted here. Because in my comments to these pictures I convey the idea that the one who owns time is God. But time is created by the conscious, rhythmic and progressive movement of the actor. Therefore, God is, first of all, a person who carries out his actions consciously, rhythmically and progressively. Yes. In this book of mine, I will talk about how I understand the word God. And since I have named the book Srimad Bhagavatam, then, obviously, my main attention will be given to the Vedic God. He has many names. I limit myself to the name Krishna. Because for me, as a native speaker of Russian, the phrase Hare Krishna, Hare Rama is very close and understandable. After all, Karya equals face. And Hare Rama is the frame of the portrait. And in the Vedas, God is spoken of first of all as a person. About the face of the supersoul. And as for the name Krishna specifically, here I easily agree with the formulation of the Vedas, Krishna equals cause of causes. In conclusion of this introduction, I would like to remind you once again, my dear reader, of my request to somehow make me understand how clearly and understandably I express my thoughts. I will be infinitely glad and grateful, and it will be very interesting for me to get acquainted with all your points of view on the issue covered in this book. Feedback and discussion of the issues that provide our lives are necessary for all of us, as forms of consciousness. In order to learn how to interact as conflict-free as possible in the process of providing our minds with excellent quality life.